But I'd love to start at a high level and maybe define what a data catalog is and why there is a need for it in the first place.
Totally. I may actually take one step back and talk about what the problem is, and then come to why data catalog is a solution and what the hell is a data catalog. Great. And so the problem is, over the last decade, we as organizations have generated, carried too much data, right? A lot of it. And it's not a surprise if you look at the innovation that's happened, right? So there's innovation that's happened in data warehousing space with BigQuery, Snowflake, and other newer data warehouses, making it really easy for you to store tons and tons of data. Then there's innovation that's happened in the ingestion space with things like Fivetran, Stitch, that let you bring in more data very quickly. Then we have said, okay, through various different systems like Airflow and dbt, you can now transform more data. And we've said, okay, we have these BI tools for making analytical decisions like Tableau, Mode, Looker, things of that sort. And all of a sudden, we have said organizations need to be more data driven. So previously, it was only the analyst's job to crunch numbers, but we have said, like, hey, if you're a PM, an operations manager, or a marketing manager, you got to look at data to then decide, like, how are you going to use it, right? So in one way, technology and innovation has made us bring in a lot of data. And so our lakes and warehouses are just like brimming with data. On the other side, we've handed data usage cards to all these people in the company, right? And the problem that's created is all these people are coming into the data systems and have no idea and context about the data. What data is out there? How do I use it? Who else is using it? When was it last updated? Who can I ask questions? What has already been built on it? And that's the problem that has become even more acute today. It existed in certain number of companies in the past, super acute today. And the historical way of solving this problem has been to what I call so a data catalog is a system that lets you sort of get metadata, which is what data exists, who uses it, what's built on it, where does it come from, and then power use cases around discovery. I'm going to do analysis on ETA, where do I find this data? Or use cases around transformation or migration. I'm moving from HubSpot to Salesforce. I want to replace all my dashboards and have them point to the Salesforce data. So that's the intent of a data catalog system, and it serves use cases around productivity of data scientists, data engineers, as well as use cases around compliance with regulations in various different domains.
And maybe double clicking on the latter part. So governance, like, why does governance matter?
Yeah, totally. I mean, governance matters in those two ways, right? The first one is around productivity. So your analysts and your product managers and anybody who's going to make use of data during their job is effective at using that data. They may have skills like being able to write a SQL query or interpret a dashboard that are generic, but they don't have the organizational context. And on governance, on the other side, which is compliance with regulations, those are actually domain dependent. So there's the regular regulations here, like GDPR and CCPA, that apply to almost all organizations. And then depending on the domain, if you're a financial company, like there are many in New York, you may have certain other regulations that you have to fulfill. So these could be around, I'm reporting this data to a certain auditor, and I want to be able to prove that there's no manipulation that's happening outside of what I already know during the process. Or this particular system is regulated and should not have any sensitive data outside of these bounds, right? So understanding what your data is in that system and what are the bounds there, so you can alert or other style of compliance and governance requirements that are pretty top of mind for users.
Great. All right. So that's the problem. And, like a lot of great entrepreneurs, you experienced it firsthand at Lyft. How did you guys go about solving it, and maybe just walk us through the birth of Amundsen as the open source project?
Yeah, so I'll start with telling you, like, how had that problem been solved until that point, and why was that not good enough, right? So up until that point, I'm talking 2017, 2018, the problem had been solved by what I now call curated data catalogs. A curated data catalog is a catalog that generates essentially blank wiki pages for your data. And you may have a wiki page for a data set in ClickHouse or in Snowflake or in BigQuery, something like that. And then you may have a blank page for a Tableau dashboard. And essentially, you get a bunch of people, users, to populate these blank pages. And the information you populate is like this particular table or data set is the blessed data set for this kinds of use cases, that this data set is often joined with this other data set, that the canonical dashboard for viewing businesses' health metrics are here, right?
And it's literally manual notes, right? That just
correct.
like have a, okay.
Yeah. And so the problem with this approach is that it takes a very long time to value. It takes you, depending on the size of the organization, anywhere from like a year to 3 years to actually get all this metadata in, to then hand it to your users or your compliance folks and be like, let's use it, right? The second one is the moment you write it in any company that's evolving, which is every company, this gets out of date. It's just a matter of whether it gets out of date tonight or if it gets out of date 3 months from now, right? And so this had been the status quo of solving this problem. And what has happened is there is a newer creed of companies that are all cloud, fast-growing, product-led, and it didn't start yesterday. It didn't start 2017. It actually started before that. These companies are growing at such a pace, and there's growth in 2 dimensions. One is the amount of data they have, and the second is the number of people that are going to use this data, right? And in these 2 companies, when you have one or more of these 2 criteria met, that system breaks. You cannot rely on curation as the source of discovery, understanding, context about a catalog. And therefore, there's a need for what I now call automated data catalogs. And an automated data catalog cannot guarantee you that this is a single source of truth, but it can tell you that out of these 200 data sets related to, I don't know, pricing, these 180 are no good for you and your use case because they haven't been updated all that while. Nobody else in your team uses it. There are no dashboards built on top of it, all that kind of stuff. And then these are the 20 that you should dig into. And it won't tell you like, hey, this is the guaranteed source of truth, but like it will really help you focus down on the ones that make sense. And then you bring in the rest 20% of the curation to get the last 80, last mile benefit here. So that's the reason why previous tools didn't work and led me to push for a new product being created. I'm happy to talk more about that too.
Yeah. So how does the automation work? Is that so the metadata gets automatically captured from the various sources and like sort of like pre-populated? Is that the idea?
Yeah. And so let's dig in. The main systems that you need an automated data catalog to integrate with are your data warehouse. And this could be a data lake, data warehouse, things of that sort. And from there, you get information about what data sets are present or what tables are present. I use those 2 terms interchangeably, as well as how they are being used. So a data warehouse usually has access logs that you can take out and parse them to generate like, oh, it's often joined with this other thing. And, Jack often uses this data, so on and so forth. The second system we integrate with, that an automated data catalog needs to integrate with, is the BI tool. And so it has all your information about what dashboards are viewed, what dashboards are being built from what data sets, who are the people who view those dashboards. And the third system is usually an HR or a team hierarchy system. So you can figure out that these people are in the same team and therefore be able to suggest interesting data or metadata for them to use based on what your peers are doing. And then there are transformation systems. You know how often or when a data set is usually transformed into another. You can understand the lineage between one data set and another, lineage between one data set and a dashboard. And lastly, this category, the last ones are collaboration systems. So often, I don't know how it is in y'all's companies, but the companies I work with, as an analyst, you imagine, like, have you seen one of those memes where it's like, oh, what my parents think I do and what my coworkers think I do and what I actually do, right? Yeah. And this meme comes in my mind when I think about like the work of an analyst or a data scientist in some of the companies I worked at. Like, the expectation is like, oh, they spend all their time on like modeling, and that modeling can be analytical or algorithmic. The reality is, I feel like they spend all their time on Slack, and they're like, hey, what's the source of truth for this data? Where do I find this? Has someone else used it? What does this column mean? Like all this kind of stuff, right? And so it's important that we integrate, coming back to the last point, an automated data catalog also integrates with your collaboration tools. That's your Slack, for example, and links conversations about data that have interesting context back to the data catalog. So and then it ends up becoming like a Google search for your data based on all these metadata systems, and kind of creating a page rank algorithm showing you various different intricate pieces of information from a few of these systems.
And on the access side, so you mentioned like you integrate with the HR system so that you can like infer like who's part of what team, but like in terms of like giving access to certain people to certain types of data, can that be automated, or is that like the 20% where like you're like, okay, well, you know, Jack has access to this, but Matt doesn't?
Yeah. So when people talk about access control, they talk about in one or two different dimensions. One is access within the data catalog. So one person may be able to search for something while the other may not be able to. The other one is access in the actual data systems itself based on some classification that may be present in the data catalog. Which direction were you thinking, if any of those at all, Matt?
Sort of both. Sort of both. I mean, mostly. Matt should not access GDPR data for whatever reason, and therefore the catalog should make sure that Matt doesn't access.
Yeah. So it's a great question. So the way I have done this, and I continue to think this way, is that often you would have these data sets or assets in the company that would be locked down only to a specific set of individuals, right? I have found, though, a lot of time being wasted in this catch-22 problem where Matt doesn't have access to this GDPR data, but Matt needs to do something that requires him to have access to this data. But due to the lack of knowledge of even existence of this data, Matt can't do the job, right? And so one default stance that we have is that within a certain deployment, and sometimes the deployment is for the entire company, sometimes the deployment is for a certain line of business within the company. Within a certain deployment, discovery of the data, the fact that there is a GDPR data set, should be public information. But you can't really find out anything of consequence or access this data without explicit permission being given to Matt in order to query this data, right? So that's one stance we have. And then the permission management, actually, the catalog facilitates that in the sense that you can press a request button and it makes an API call. But actually, the management of that happens outside the catalog. So that at that point is a partnership with either a product that provides access control or built-in access control in a system, and in a data warehouse system like Snowflake or BigQuery or something like that.
So a big part of success then is like integrating with a bunch of different sources. I mean, it sounds like you, just to recap what you said, a lot of like part of the modern data stack, effectively, like you integrate with whether data warehouses. But like, is that part of the idea? Like, how do you determine like the whole universe of integration? Because it's sort of limitless, right? And especially, we had Jamak, the last event, we talked about the data mesh, right? Like, this is only going to get more complex and decentralized if we believe that the world is going towards the data mesh concept. Like, how do you ensure that you're not like constantly running around trying to connect to the next source?
Yeah, totally. I think it's a great point. I would say actually that's one of the things is that's the primary reason why like you need a product like this. First of all, that the modern data stack is not a bundled one, it's an unbundled one. So you have your data storage system, you have your ETL system, you have your transformation system, you have your BI tool, and none of these tools are packaged by like IBM and you're buying one behemoth IBM platform, right? You're getting these products that are unbundled, and that actually leads, in my opinion, I feel strongly that's the right thing to do, and you get the best of breed products, but it creates problems around management and governance that are net new and need to be solved in a new way. And that's where like something like a data catalog can really help. But a business owner running this business and having to integrate with all these systems, it is also something that we pay the cost for. And thankfully, the cost hasn't been huge. I do think it's the right thing to do for us to evolve our integration when new systems emerge. And our guiding light is our customers. And while we can choose to some degree what kinds of customer and what verticals and what industries and what markets we focus on, we find that most of the customers that want a modern data catalog also have the modern stack. And the modern stack has actually not as exhaustive of an option. Like, if I were talking about data warehouses, like I keep coming back to these two, right? But in reality, there's probably 50 different data warehouses, if not more. The thing is that many of them, like the ones that are commonly associated with the modern stack, happen to be the same over and over again.
You're right. Then coming back to the Amundsen story, so you and others started the open source project at Lyft. Like, so how long did that last? And then maybe walk us through the birth of Stemma as a separate company.
Yeah, totally. So continuing with the story, like this is a big problem at Lyft. Too much data, too many people wanting to query the data. No one's got any clue what's going on. And this idea of an automated data catalog stuck with me. And we started building this product internally with the target persona being an analyst and a data scientist to just really make them effective. We did a hackathon, which was like a very quick throwaway version just to see if we can de-risk the project, and then build the real project over the next few months. We launched an alpha of this project to 10 users, and they were like, this is the best thing we've seen. We quickly got their feedback further, changed it to launch it to beta more publicly to everybody at Lyft. And at Lyft, from that day, which is probably mid-2018, till today, this product is the single highest CSAT scoring internal product, right? And so has 750 users every week. Lyft only has 250 or so data analysts, data scientists, right? So there's like all these other people who have started using this product because the barrier to entry to them to using data has been further lowered, right? And so you have these 750 users using it every week. And
so those are like product managers, like business folks.
Yep, exactly. Right. And then we started getting these. I wrote a blog post, I believe it was late 2018, called Introducing Amundsen. Amundsen was not open source at that time. And that blog post kind of caught on fire. And it was like, oh, we need a system like this. And we said, the concepts here are pretty universal. It's just that the integrations are very Lyft specific. So what happens if you open source this so people can use the concepts and build their own integrations? And that project became what Amundsen is today. Super highly used, over 35 companies use it in open source, ING, Instacart, Brexasana. And then over the years, I found that the kind of company that will put together resources to establish an open source project, the kind of velocity we needed in order to move the roadmap in direct partnership with companies that really needed to move fast, was best suited with a commercial company around it, right? So that led to the birth of Stemma, because I felt like we could only solve this problem for a very tiny sliver of companies, and we had to solve it for everybody, right? So Stemma was founded in 2020, last year, and we were funded by Sequoia, and solving this problem of data discovery, data cataloging through automation, and have been serving our customers and growing that way. And that's the journey thus far till today.
Very cool. So the data catalog space is reasonably competitive. Obviously, it's a big opportunity, big market, and there seems to be, startups, scale-ups, I guess, that have been at it for a little while. The Calibras of the world, Elation, both of which we had speak at this event over the years. And then there's like a new generation. Certainly you guys, but. Others as well, like Metaphor and Castor, like this, Atlant, like a number of like different players, which are all, in our data landscape. For those that want to zoom in on those categories, how do you think about those? How do you position, and how do you eventually win that market?
Yeah, totally. So a few things here. One is that there are kinds of catalogs that are more command and control catalog. And this is a product, but it's actually a manifestation of the culture of the company. So if you are in a company where data is very tightly restricted and you don't want to democratize access to certain kinds of data for others to use and make decisions with, these catalogs work really well. And so these are, you curate them, but you also end up creating these heavy workflows that requires like going to a university to understand how to manage and orchestrate these workflows, but also a team of people who are on the other side of these workflows, sort of approving anything as small as like updating the description of a column to as big as granting the request to access, right? Some of these you would have in any company, but some honestly like only exist in companies that have a very sort of command and control culture around data. Then there are companies that want to actually evangelize, democratize the right data for decision making to everybody in the company, right? And the first big difference that I'd share in the offerings is the command and control catalogs, which are often curated and workflow based, while the other ones being more democratized and like automated in their both the metadata they get and the users they support, right? So Stemma very clearly is in the latter category, right? We do not do well in serving the command and control style organizations. The second thing I would say is there's a tendency in the space to build products that are platform, right? And so an example is you have a data catalog that provides a search or a browse experience, but in addition to it, you will put a BI-like tool so you can write queries. In addition to it, you'll create like a wiki page style tool, which allows you to write more detailed pages about data. You will have like a conversation system in the tool so you can ask people questions and respond, kind of like those comments in the Confluence page, things of that sort. The problem with that is if you're a very small company, that's great. You buy one thing, you get all the tools, they're all very well integrated. But like we were alluding to earlier, the modern data stack is unbundled, right? That means in any modern organization that's non-trivial size, and I would say like 300 employees or more, you would find that you already have tools for your BI, you already have Slack for conversations, you already have a wiki-like tool for Confluence or Notion or something like that. And it's very important, in my opinion, the right thing to do is to integrate with these best of breed tools instead of building a coherent like home or platform or something like that. So that's the other dividing line I would put, is that there are some catalogs that tend to choose like a more of a home or a platform approach that work really well for really small organizations. But when you grow, you have to integrate with the ecosystem the organization is in. And we, for example, we have no feature to have a conversation in the data catalog, right? And that's intentional because we want to integrate with Slack. And that's why there's a Slack bot and not like have conversations in Stemma. We don't have a BI tool in Stemma. We integrate with your Tableau or Looker or things of that sort. So those are sort of the dividing lines I'll put in how we think about the world.
Really interesting. All right, let's maybe close this discussion because there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that I'd like to talk about. Let's talk about like maybe your go-to-market, like open source versus the commercial product. How do you view both of those work in tandem from a product and go-to-market perspective?
Yeah, totally. So some context here is before Lyft, I was at Cloudera. I spent about 5 years working at Cloudera. I was a lowly engineer, so I didn't have a whole lot of context into strategic decisions around like open source versus proprietary. But I had a lot of experience being on the receiving end of those decisions, right? And being a part of communities and seeing like how that was working and sort of straddling the line between open source and proprietary in the Cloudera world. And Cloudera had a competitor, Hortonworks, which was all open source and simply selling support and services, right? So I'm gonna take my data practitioner hat on and put my business owner hat on, right? I find that selling support and services on an open source product is not a great business model. And that's not a business I'd like to be in. I also find that, so then that means you're building a product around your open core. And then the question then becomes like, what principles do you build around which you can tell your community what is open source and what's proprietary? And those principles also help you determine if the model will work for you as a business or not. And then depending on that, you also need, it's a numbers game, right? In the sense that you need to have communities of a certain size in order to convert enough people in order to like actually have the traction. Or in some cases, like the example I'll use is like Segment and Analytics.js, I think was it called. Like there was a library they put that was open source, but then they built a product around that library. And at the end of it, like there's no relationship between that open source library and the product. And I think that's a fine path to take. For us, like it's just like depends on the nature of the product, the kind of buyer and the space you're in that helps sort of make these decisions. But we're definitely not like a support and services only company. I don't think that's sustainable.
Great. All right. So there were a couple of questions. Question from Ian. What are 2 or 3 industries that are utilizing Stemma currently? Either Stemma or Amundsen.
Yeah. So for Stemma, the most common industries happen to be financial services, like there are public finance companies that use Stemma, and then also technology companies that are fast growing, and they may be product-led companies, but they also may be like in other spaces, but they're just like really fast growing companies that have a lot of data that they want to democratize and enable the rest of the organization to use. So those are sort of the kind of like heavily regulated industries, and then fast growing industries are the 2 most common places where we see. Great.
A more tactical question that you may understand better than I do from Marlon, who asked, it was actually early in the conversation when we were talking about the governance. Marlon asked if governance should be managed at the domain level.
Yeah, there's probably a lot to unparse in that question, and I'm afraid I don't have an opinion that's like a dichotomy for me. Like it to me, since you've talked to Zamak and she was on this here, I'm all for decentralization, right? So there's governance teams or data teams are in the middle of data owners and data consumers, and what we want to get out of as data teams is like not be a bottleneck, right? And sort of enable these 2 groups in the company to talk. Having said that, I don't think we wash ourselves off of the responsibility of enabling these 2 groups to talk, right? And enabling here means that you need to provide tools, artifacts, and sometimes processes to help these 2 groups talk. So an example is, let me give a concrete example. An example is the owner of the data wants to deprecate a particular data set, and they need to talk to the consumers of the dashboards that view that dashboard that is powered by the data set in question. But they have no tool for them to see like, hey, who is using my data and how are they using it, how often, right? And it is the central team's responsibility to provide that tool. And it's the owner's responsibility to use that tool and then communicate directly to their consumers. So hard for me to say if governance should be managed at domain level. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Marlon, at all, but I think there are actual activities that get democratized and sort of pushed out decentralized domains. And then there are activities mostly around enablement that we have to pick up as centralized teams to enable those groups to talk to each other.
All right, very cool. Well, on that note, that's a wrap for this conversation. Really appreciated, Mark, and it was great. Like I really appreciated how you made this educational and I think give an opportunity for folks to learn a lot. So this was great. Thank you so much. People can follow you at Mark_Grover on Twitter. What's the website for the company?
Stemma.ai.
Stemma.ai. Okay.
We couldn't get the .com address. If you starting a company and you have a name in mind, go grab the .com address and get working on that soon.
Well, AI is pretty cool as well, and you have a great blog on there that I encourage people to go read. It's very, very interesting stuff. Cool. Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's a lot of fun.